The invitation arrived in a cream envelope with gold embossing. Inside, it was the kind of place where the chandeliers cost more than my house, and the air smelled like old money and exclusion. Tucked behind the formal card was a handwritten note on my mother Susan's monogrammed stationery. It read, "Evelyn, please dress appropriately. This is an important evening for Gary. Black tie means black tie, not the drab business casual you usually wear. If you cannot manage proper attire, it might be better to skip it. He will understand. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community." I stared at the note for a long time, the weight of the cardstock feeling like a lead weight in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just looked at my 5-year-old daughter, Chloe, who was coloring at the kitchen table, her dark curls falling over her face as she meticulously picked a purple crayon. Emotion is just bad data in an audit, and right now, my life was under review. I took a deep breath, summoned a cold clarity, and reached for my phone. My mother's voice was bright when she answered, that artificially sweetened tone she used when she was about to do something cruel. "Evelyn, honey, did you get the invitation?" "I did," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Good. So, you saw the note about the dress code?" Susan paused, and I could almost hear her rehearsing the next part. "The thing is, your sister Tiffany is bringing her new boyfriend. He is the son of a major tech billionaire, a very prominent family. Very traditional. And we just think it might be easier for everyone if you sat this one out." "You are uninviting me from my own father's birthday?" I asked. "Not uninviting, dear. Just suggesting. You are a single mother. You work so hard at that little agency. You probably do not have time to find proper attire. We just do not want you to feel uncomfortable or out of place." She meant she didn't want me to embarrass them. She didn't want the disappointing daughter ruining Tiffany's big play for a billionaire's inheritance. "I understand perfectly," I said quietly and hung up. I didn't waste a second on anger. Anger wasn't productive. Instead, I opened my laptop. My screen glowed with a different kind of power. The kind made of encrypted files, security clearances, and billion-dollar government contracts. I was not a clerk at a little agency. I was the chief strategic officer for a defense contractor managing $1.2 billion in classified state projects. I had security clearance levels my family didn't even know existed. I made $750,000 a year, and that was before the stock options. To Gary and Susan, I was a failure because I got pregnant at 22 and chose my daughter over a traditional law degree. To the governor of this state, I was the woman who saved his administration from a massive international legal scandal 3 years ago. I found the contact for Governor Marcus Sterling and hit dial. "Marcus," I said when he picked up on the second ring. "Regarding our dinner meeting next Saturday to finalize the defense procurement budget, I have a change of venue." "Oh?" Marcus sounded intrigued. "Where were you thinking?" "The Grand Crystal Ballroom," I replied. "At 7 p.m. It is my father's birthday, and I think it is time I stop hiding in the shadows." There was a pause on the other end, then a chuckle. "Consider it done, Evelyn. I will bring my wife, and Lily would love to see Chloe. We will take the center table." I closed my laptop with a soft click. This was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet, and my family's account was officially overdrawn. I had spent years being the silent investor in their version of family, footing the bill for their pride while they treated me like a spare part. That ended tonight. I looked at Chloe and smiled. "Pack your bags, sweetie. We are going to a party." I spent the next few days in a state of clinical focus. To my family, I was the disappointing daughter, the one who had thrown away her potential. My sister Tiffany was everything Gary and Susan had ever dreamed of. Beautiful, charming, and now, dating a man with 3 Roman numerals in his name. She lived for Instagram photos of her perfect life, while I was the other one. The one who got pregnant during her first year of law school. The one who dropped out to raise Chloe alone after her father decided fatherhood wasn't in his 5-year plan. "This is a setback," Gary had said 7 years ago, staring at me like I was a broken piece of machinery. "But it doesn't have to ruin your life. There are options." I told him I was keeping her. Gary's face had hardened. "Olivia, be realistic. You have no degree, no career, no support system. You will be scraping by for the rest of your life." Susan had just cried, asking what they would tell people at the country club. I had figured it out, but not in the way they had hoped. I didn't go back to law school. Instead, I started working. First as a paralegal, then as a consultant for a small government contractor. The work was intense, the hours were brutal, but I was the invisible architect of every deal I touched. By the time Chloe was 3, I'd been recruited by a defense firm to manage classified projects. By 5, I was running their entire strategy division. My family had no idea. Still doing that little assistant thing? Gary would ask at the rare dinners I attended. I'd just nod. Something like that. Susan would sigh and tell me it wasn't too late to make something of myself. Tiffany would smile sympathetically and offer me her hand-me-down designer bags for interviews. I never corrected them. What was the point? They had decided who I was the day I chose my daughter over their approval. They thought I was barely scraping by in a tiny apartment. They didn't know about the 4-bedroom house in the best school district, or the $500,000 already sitting in Chloe's college fund. I drove a modest sedan to family events because my actual car, a Tesla I kept in a separate garage, would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. I'd built a life that was a balance sheet of pure success. But to them, I was still the spare daughter. My work had caught the attention of the highest offices in the state. 2 years ago, I had successfully navigated a legal nightmare involving international contracts and federal compliance. I had saved the government $1.2 billion and prevented a scandal that would have ended several careers. The project was so classified that the people I worked with didn't even know my real name. But Governor Marcus Sterling knew. He had called me personally. "Evelyn," he'd said, "you have one of the sharpest minds I have ever encountered. If you ever need anything, you call me directly." 6 months ago, he'd offered me a position as deputy legal counsel for his administration. I'd said no. I preferred working behind the scenes, and I had Chloe to think about. He'd respected that. But the offer remained open. Parents have to look out for each other, he'd told me. Now, as I watched Chloe play, I realized my silence had been a luxury my family had overdrafted for years. They thought my compassion was a weakness, a resource they could exploit while keeping me at arm's length. They were about to find out that my silence wasn't a sign of failure, it was a strategic choice. And that choice was about to change. The day of the party arrived like a clinical operation. I didn't go to a mall. I called a private stylist, who brought a selection of floor-length gowns to my home. I chose a black silk piece that was architectural in its simplicity. No sequins, no lace. Just pure, expensive authority. I paired it with a single diamond pendant and styled my hair into soft, controlled waves. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the disappointing daughter. I saw a woman who moved markets. Tiffany messaged me that afternoon. It was a photo of her in a $20,000 designer gown, her hair teased into a frantic cloud of perfection. "Thinking of you, sis," she wrote. "Stay cozy in your sweats tonight. Don't worry, I'll tell everyone you were too busy with work to make it. It's for the best. You wouldn't want to be the only one there without a label." I didn't reply. I just checked the time. 6:45 p.m. I drove to the Grand Crystal Ballroom in my Tesla, the silence of the electric motor matching the quietness of my mind. As I pulled up to the valet, the staff moved with a practiced urgency. They didn't see a single mother. They saw a VIP. I met Marcus and his wife Caroline in the lobby. "Evelyn, you look spectacular," Caroline said, hugging me. "Lily has been talking about seeing Chloe all day." "The governor is ready," Marcus added, his eyes sharp and professional. "Shall we make an entrance?" We walked toward the main ballroom. I could see my family's party through the glass doors of the private annex. They had a long table set for 25 people. Gary was at the head, looking flushed and proud in his tuxedo. Susan was fluttering around Tiffany's boyfriend Preston, who looked bored out of his mind. We didn't head for the annex. We headed for table 1. The circular booth right in the center of the main floor, positioned so that anyone walking to the private rooms had to pass directly by us. It was the table reserved for the most powerful people in the building. As we sat down, I saw Tiffany out of the corner of my eye. She was standing by the bar in the annex, holding a cocktail. She looked over, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to absolute shock. She nudged Susan, who turned and nearly dropped her glass. They didn't understand. They couldn't. In their world, I was a spare part. But as the governor of the state pulled out my chair and sat down to discuss the future of the region's defense infrastructure, the power dynamic in that room shifted so violently I could almost hear the glass shattering. This was the feminist empowerment arc they never saw coming. I wasn't just at the party. I was the reason the party mattered. "Evelyn," Marcus said, leaning in. "Before we eat, I want to review the compliance notes on the Sterling contract. Your signature is the only thing holding that billion-dollar deal together." I smiled, a thin, sharp line. "Of course, Marcus. Let's get to work." At 7:25 p.m., the main doors to the ballroom creaked open. Gary led the way, looking every bit the proud patriarch in his tailored tuxedo. Susan followed closely behind, her eyes darting around the room, making sure everyone saw her. Then came Tiffany, draped in her red silk, clinging to Preston like he was a winning lottery ticket. They were followed by 20 other guests, extended family, business associates, and people Gary wanted to impress. To reach their private annex, they had to walk a gauntlet. They had to walk directly past table 1. I saw the exact moment Gary realized I was there. He stopped dead in his tracks. 3 feet from our booth. His face went through a rapid-fire sequence of emotions. Confusion, irritation, and then a sudden, jarring panic. Susan stepped up behind him, her face turning a ghostly shade of pale. "Evelyn?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" I didn't stand up. I didn't reach for my napkin. I just looked up and kept my voice neutral, pleasant, and entirely in control. "Hello, Mom. Happy birthday, Dad." What is this?" Gary stammered, his eyes flickering between me and the man sitting across from me. Marcus Sterling stood up slowly, the kind of unhurried movement that commands a room. He extended a hand. "Robert Hayes, I presume? Happy birthday. It is a pleasure to finally meet Evelyn's family. She speaks of your dedication to appearances quite often." Gary mechanically shook the governor's hand, his mouth hanging open. "Governor Sterling, I had no idea you were friends with my daughter." "Friends?" Marcus's smile sharpened, a predator sensing a weakness. "Evelyn is far more than a friend. She is one of the most trusted, legal, and strategic minds in my administration. She has been consulting on our high-level defense contracts for over 2 years." Tiffany pushed forward then, her face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief. Preston was right behind her. But he wasn't looking at Tiffany. He was staring at me with his jaw dropped. "Legal advisor?" Tiffany scoffed, her voice high and brittle. "Evelyn is a paralegal. She dropped out of school. She's been struggling as a single mother for 7 years on a clerk's salary." The silence that followed was deafening. Preston stepped forward, his voice a dazed whisper. "Wait, Evelyn Hayes? You are the Evelyn Hayes from Meridian Defense Solutions?" I turned my gaze to him. "I am." Preston looked at Gary, then back at me. "My father, Senator Whitfield, talks about you constantly," he said. "You are the only reason the Henderson Aerospace contract didn't turn into a congressional hearing. He said you were the sharpest legal mind in federal contracting. He's been trying to headhunt you for the Federal Compliance Board for months." Gary sat down heavily in a nearby chair, not even caring that he was blocking the walkway for other guests. "This isn't. Evelyn works as an assistant. She has no degree. She told us she was fine." "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade, "I have been building a career while raising my daughter. I make $750,000 a year, not counting bonuses. I own my house outright. Chloe's college fund has $500,000 in it. I have security clearances most federal employees will never see. I didn't tell you because you never asked. You were too busy being embarrassed by the version of me you created in your heads." Susan's hand went to her throat, her eyes welling with tears. "Evelyn, why didn't you tell us?" "Because," I said, leaning back into the plush leather of the booth, "I learned years ago that your opinion of me had nothing to do with my actual life, and everything to do with your need to maintain a certain image. You uninvited me tonight because you thought I'd be an eyesore. But as it turns out, I'm the only one in this room who actually belongs at this table." The silence at table 1 was absolute. Gary's face was a map of cognitive dissonance, his eyes darting from my silk gown to the governor, then back to the folder in my hands. Susan's tears had stopped, replaced by a vacant, wide-eyed stare. Behind them, their 20 guests had stopped whispering. They were all leaners now, stretching their necks to catch every word of the collapse. "Evelyn," Gary finally croaked, his voice sounding thin and old. This is wonderful news. Why would you hide this? We are your family. We could have celebrated this together." "Celebrate?" I asked, and the word felt like ice on my tongue. "You didn't want a daughter to celebrate, Gary. You wanted a scapegoat. You wanted a baseline of failure so that Tiffany's successes would look even brighter. If I were the struggling paralegal you imagined, I'd be sitting at home right now, eating takeout while you toasted to Preston's family." Tiffany's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You did this on purpose. You set this up to humiliate us on Dad's 61st birthday." "Humiliate you?" I tilted my head. "I am having a business dinner with the governor. You are the ones who stopped at my table. You are the ones who uninvited me because you were worried about the label on my dress." I turned my attention back to Gary. The moment of reckoning had arrived. I opened the leather folder on the table. "Speaking of business, Gary, I believe you've been waiting for a signature on the Sterling Infrastructure subcontract. Your firm is the primary bidder for the regional supply chain, isn't it?" Gary's eyes lit up with a desperate, pathetic hope. Yes, Evelyn. That contract it is everything. It would take the firm to a national level. If you could just talk to the governor." Marcus Sterling didn't say a word. He simply gestured toward me, deferring the entire weight of the state's authority to my hands. "I've already reviewed the file, Gary. I said, my voice dropping to a clinical professional register. And I found something interesting. A series of discrepancies in the 2023 tax filings for your subsidiary. It looks like a $40,000 inheritance withdrawal that matches a signature you forged on a document 3 years ago. My document. The color drained from Gary's face so fast I thought he might faint. Susan let out a small, strangled gasp. You didn't think I'd ever see those filings, did you? I continued. You thought I was too disappointing to ever hold a position where I'd be auditing your firm. But here is the reality. Your company is currently under federal review for compliance fraud, and as the chief strategic officer for the primary contractor, I am the one who has to sign the fit and proper certification. Evelyn, please, Susan sobbed, reaching out to touch my arm. I moved it away before she could make contact. We're family. You can't do this to your father. He'll lose everything. We'll lose the house. This is the price of silence, Mom, I said, looking her directly in the eye. For 7 years, I stayed silent while you judged me. I stayed silent while you excluded me. I even stayed silent when Gary forged my name to cover his first business deficit. I gave you every chance to be a family. But tonight, you told me I wasn't appropriate for your world. So, I'm going to be professional. I picked up my fountain pen. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look for a reason to be merciful. I signed the bottom of the page, not the approval, but the formal notice of non-compliance and suspension of bidding rights. This wasn't revenge, Gary, I said, handing the folder to the governor's aide who had stepped forward. This was just accounting. And your account is officially closed. Gary stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the folder as it was whisked away by the governor's aide. The surrounding tables, filled with the state's elite, had gone silent. The only sound was the muffled clinking of silverware from the far corner of the room. Susan was still whispering Evelyn, please. But the words had lost their weight. They were just noise now. I think we're done here, Robert, Marcus Sterling said, his voice regaining its warm, public-facing tone, though his eyes remained as cold as mine. Enjoy your birthday. It is certainly one you will remember. Gary didn't move. He didn't even look at the governor. He looked at me like he was seeing a hologram. A ghost of the daughter he thought he could control. He looked older, smaller, his expensive tuxedo suddenly appearing ill-fitting and absurd. I didn't feel the rush of heat I expected. I didn't feel the burn of revenge. Instead, I felt a profound, clinical peace. Tiffany finally broke the silence, her voice a sharp, ugly screech. You think you're so smart? You're still just a single mother. You're still the one who ruined everything 7 years ago. I didn't even blink. Tiffany, you've spent your whole life performing success while I was busy achieving it. Preston, if I were you, I'd check the prenuptial agreement very carefully. Her family's brand just went into foreclosure. Preston didn't defend her. He actually stepped a few inches away from her, his face pale, as he processed the fact that he was tied to a sinking ship. He knew the name Meridian Defense Solutions. He knew that in my world, image was nothing and results were everything. As the security detail stepped forward to politely but firmly guide my family toward their private annex, the maitre d' hovered anxiously. Miss Hayes, would you like to move to a more private setting? No, I said, picking up my wine glass and looking out over the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view from here is exactly what I needed. I watched them file past. A parade of broken pride and whispered scandals. Gary was the last to go. He stopped for a split second, his hand on the back of a chair to steady himself. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. The disappointing daughter had just closed the book on his legacy. Dinner continued. The girls, Chloe and Lily, were laughing over their coloring books, oblivious to the earthquake that had just leveled my past. Caroline and I discussed the challenges of motherhood in high-pressure environments, while Marcus told stories about state politics that had Chloe giggling. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't the guest who didn't belong. I was the host of my own life. Everything Gary had ever taught me about appearances was wrong. Image isn't power. Silence isn't weakness. And success isn't something you perform for an audience. It is the quiet, lethal strength of knowing exactly who you are when the lights go out. That night, the silence in my house was different. It wasn't the heavy, lonely silence of a woman trying to prove she could survive. It was the light, airy silence of a woman who had already won. I tucked Chloe into her bed, kissing her forehead as she drifted off, dreaming of the fountains at the Grand Crystal Ballroom and her new friend Lily. She didn't know about the contracts, the forgeries, or the collapse of her grandfather's firm. All she knew was that her mother was happy. I sat in my living room with a glass of water, watching the moonlight filter through the trees in my backyard. My phone sat on the coffee table, buzzing incessantly. I didn't need to look at it to know what the screen said. A dozen missed calls from Gary, 5 frantic texts from Susan. Evelyn, we can fix this. Talk to the governor. Your father didn't mean it. A long, rambling voicemail from Tiffany, alternating between cursing me out and begging me for Preston's father's private number. I picked up the phone. I didn't open the messages. I didn't listen to the voicemail. I opened the group chat titled Hayes Family and stared at the icon of photo from 5 years ago where I was cropped out of the edge. I tapped the settings, hit delete and exit, and watched the thread vanish into the digital void. This was the final twist Gary never saw coming. He thought my success was a weapon I would use to force my way back into his heart. He thought I wanted his apology. But the truth was much simpler. I didn't need him to see me. I just needed him to stop being in my way. A few months later, I officially accepted the appointment as Deputy Legal Counsel to the Governor. The announcement made the front page of the State Business Journal. My name was no longer a secret. I was no longer the invisible architect. I was the face of the administration's legal strategy. Gary's firm didn't survive the audit. Without the Sterling contract, the debt he'd been hiding for years came crashing down. He didn't go to prison, I'd insured. The investigation stayed civil rather than criminal as a final act of mercy. But he lost the house, the prestige, and the image he'd spent 60 years building. Last I heard, they were living in a modest 2-bedroom condo, and Susan was complaining to anyone who would listen that Evelyn just became too busy for us. I was busy. I was busy raising a confident, brilliant daughter. I was busy shaping the future of the state. I was busy being exactly who I was always meant to be. Sometimes, people need to see you at your absolute best to realize they'd been seeing you wrong all along. But by the time they realize it, you've already moved on. The best revenge isn't a loud confrontation or a public takedown. It is just living well, on your own terms, in your own way, and finally letting the silence do the talking. Sometimes, the best revenge is to live a good life and succeed in your own way. Do you agree with Evelyn's approach? Tag a friend who needs to hear this story, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing transformation stories.